Canada has been very tough to deal with over the years. They send us hundreds of thousands of cars. They make a lot of money with that. We don't need their cars.
Canada is now abandoning United States automobiles at a pace that analysts once said was impossible, and the scale of this shift is quietly rewriting the balance of industrial power across North America. For decades, the assumption was simple. Detroit would anchor the continent, Canada would reliably absorb American exports, and the auto corridor built since 1965 would remain unshakable. But the newest data tells a far more unsettling story. Canadian demand for American vehicles has dropped to levels not seen in modern records, while European manufacturers are expanding their footprint with strategic confidence. This is not just a story about car sales. It reflects a deeper fracture triggered by the ongoing trade war and the rising cost of tariffs that have reshaped supply chains, investment flows, and consumer trust. What we are witnessing is a rare geopolitical pivot in which Canada, once the most dependable economic partner of the United States, is quietly reassessing where stability truly lies. In the next segments, we will break down why this shift is happening, how much it matters to both countries, and why Europe is emerging as the unexpected winner. And stay with me until the end, because the most surprising insight is not about Canada turning away from the United States, but about the new power bloc forming in the background that almost nobody is talking about. The turning point in this unraveling economic relationship becomes unmistakable when examining the structural shifts unfolding inside Canada's automotive market. The most revealing change is not visible in consumer showrooms, but in the procurement data of manufacturers, parts suppliers, and logistics providers. Canada's largest dealership networks report that sourcing lead times for United States vehicles have lengthened sharply, not because of temporary bottlenecks, but because the entire supply chain is absorbing tariff-related costs that continue to rise with every policy revision in Washington. Tariffs intended to protect American workers are instead driving Canadian buyers toward regions where political volatility does not directly inflate the price of a vehicle. At the same time, European manufacturers are strengthening their positions within Canada with notable ambition. Industry filings show multi-year expansion plans that align with Canada's national strategies for clean energy, electrification, and long-term industrial cooperation. The Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement has quietly rewired cost structures, giving European Union suppliers a pricing advantage that American firms cannot match under current tariff rules. This advantage is not theoretical. It is appearing in dealer margins, financing packages, and the availability of electric vehicle inventory tailored to Canada's climate. For the United States, the deeper concern is the strategic consequence of losing preferential psychological status among Canadian consumers. Once that foundation erodes, loyalty does not return simply because tariffs eventually decrease or a new administration enters office. When a country begins to build trust with alternative suppliers, the gravitational pull of the old system weakens permanently. Yet the most alarming indicator is not the shift toward Europe itself, but the emerging pattern inside Canada's investment flows capital that once supported North American integration is being reallocated with a completely different objective. And when you see where that capital is moving next, the magnitude of the upcoming disruption becomes impossible to ignore, because it suggests that Canada is preparing for something far more consequential than a change in vehicle preference. The Canadian consumer is becoming the earliest and clearest indicator of a deeper economic redirection. What stands out in recent surveys is not anger or nationalism, but a quiet recalibration of trust. Canadians are no longer comparing horsepower, trim levels, or brand heritage. They are evaluating reliability of supply, predictability of pricing, and the political exposure embedded in every product linked to the United States. This shift reveals a profound change in how households perceive risk during a period marked by trade war escalation and rising tariffs. The erosion of confidence began subtly. Families noticed that ordering an American vehicle suddenly required longer delivery windows and higher deposits. Then came the unexpected cost adjustments tied to tariffs on steel, aluminum, and specialized components fees passed directly to buyers with no clear timeline for relief. Even consumers who traditionally favored American trucks and SUVs now report they are unwilling to absorb cost increases that feel disconnected from market fundamentals and driven instead by political turbulence in Washington. As this sentiment develops, purchasing decisions are shifting in measurable ways. Canadian households are adopting a more diversified approach to consumption, spreading risk across brands, regions, and technologies. Notably, electric vehicles and hybrids imported from Europe have gained traction because they offer stable pricing structures, transparent regulatory frameworks, and long-term support commitments through the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement. These are not emotional choices. They are financial decisions shaped by uncertainty surrounding the United States policy landscape. At the community level, the consequences become even more visible. Local repair shops increasingly report shortages of parts for American models, while aftermarket distributors adjust their inventories toward European specifications. Insurance rates in some provinces reflect higher projected maintenance costs for American vehicles, signaling that the financial system itself is beginning to price in the volatility created by United States tariffs. These are small adjustments individually, but collectively they represent a consumer ecosystem adapting to a future where American-made products no longer feel inherently secure. The social psychology behind these decisions is critical. For generations, owning an American vehicle symbolized participation in the broader North American economic story. Today, that symbolism is weakening. Practicality now supersedes tradition, and prudence is overtaking nostalgia. A shift of this nature rarely reverses, because once consumers internalize risk, they reward stability with new patterns of loyalty. And that loyalty can eventually migrate from one continent to another without the fanfare that policymakers expect. Yet even with these emerging trends, the most consequential effects are unfolding far beyond consumer households. The larger economic impact is already reshaping Canada's industrial landscape in ways that will challenge the dominance of the United States far more directly. Within Canada's corporate sector, the response to United States instability has been decisive and increasingly irreversible. Manufacturers, logistics firms, and technology suppliers are rewriting their procurement strategies to minimize exposure to tariff volatility. These decisions, driven by risk modeling and long-term cost projections, are creating a supply chain architecture that no longer assumes the United States will remain the center of North American production. The most significant shift can be seen in the financing patterns of corporate investment. Canadian companies are expanding partnerships with European Union firms to secure access to advanced battery systems, zero-emission vehicle platforms, and energy-efficient powertrain technologies. These collaborations have intensified as Canada positions itself as a global hub for critical minerals, including nickel, cobalt, and graphite that support European electrification goals. These are long-term industrial alignments, not short-term reactions to a single policy cycle. At the operational level, companies are retooling manufacturing lines to comply with European standards, recognizing that the predictability of the European regulatory environment offers clarity that the United States can no longer guarantee. This strategic realignment is reinforced by the logistics sector, which is investing heavily in expanded Atlantic shipping capacity, advanced cold weather testing facilities, and data-driven distribution networks designed around European supply routes. The outcome is a quiet but consequential transformation. Canada is gradually becoming less dependent on American industrial ecosystems and more integrated with European economic frameworks. This transformation reduces the leverage the United States has traditionally enjoyed through market size and proximity, challenging the very foundation of North American economic integration. For American firms, the implications are severe. Losing priority access to Canada means losing a stabilizing force that historically absorbed production surpluses and cushioned downturns in domestic demand. Without Canada as a reliable counterweight, the United States will face sharper cycles of volatility during global slowdowns, amplifying the internal disruptions created by the trade war and tariffs. And this is where the story takes a far more serious turn. Because the next layer of economic restructuring does not simply shift sales or investment, it threatens to reshape the continent's industrial hierarchy entirely. What emerges from this shift will determine whether the United States remains the dominant force in North American manufacturing, or whether a new axis is forming that could eclipse it in ways Washington has not yet anticipated. From the perspective of the United States, the emerging pattern is not merely a dent in export figures. It is the erosion of a strategic asset that has anchored American manufacturing power for over half a century. Canada's role as both a buffer and a stabilizing force for United States producers. For decades, shipments moving northward have helped American companies smooth production cycles, absorb excess inventory, and maintain employment during downturns in domestic demand. That stabilizing mechanism is now fading, and the implications extend far beyond the automotive sector. The trade war, once framed as a defensive maneuver to protect American workers, is producing unexpected collateral damage inside the United States. Tariffs on metals, components, and intermediate goods have forced American manufacturers to contend with higher input costs while simultaneously reducing the competitiveness of their products abroad. Canada, once considered the most reliable market in the world for American goods, is no longer insulated from these disruptions. As Canadian firms diversify suppliers, United States producers face the dual pressure of elevated costs and shrinking foreign demand. This dynamic becomes especially concerning when examining industrial employment. Provinces such as Ontario once acted as extensions of the United States' industrial heartland, supporting tens of thousands of American jobs through cross-border production chains. However, as Canada redirects investment toward European technologies and standards, those jobs face the risk of attrition. In economic terms, the United States is losing not only market share, but also operational interdependence, an invisible support structure that policymakers long took for granted. There is also a geopolitical dimension to this shift. For generations, North American economic integration helped sustain the United States' position as the default leader of the Western industrial world. A weakening bond with Canada undermines this influence at a time when global competition is intensifying. China, South Korea, and the European Union are advancing aggressive industrial policies, while the United States is struggling to maintain cohesion in its own supply chains. Losing Canada as a deeply aligned partner does not simply represent a commercial setback. It marks the thinning of a strategic alliance that underpins American influence on trade standards, regulatory norms, and technological adoption across the continent. What worries analysts most is that many of these losses are not cyclical. They have the characteristics of structural decline, a recalibration of economic gravity that will persist even if tariffs eventually decrease or political leadership changes in Washington. The friction introduced during the trade war has created lasting doubts about the predictability of United States policy, and once predictability disappears, partners begin to reconsider their loyalties. Yet even this erosion of economic influence does not capture the full magnitude of what is unfolding. The most significant shift becomes visible only when viewed through the lens of international competition, and in that arena, Europe is moving with extraordinary precision. While the United States grapples with internal volatility and the repercussions of tariffs, European nations have recognized an opening and are moving swiftly to reshape their role in North America. Under the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, Europe has gained unprecedented access to the Canadian market access that arrives at the exact moment the United States is experiencing reduced credibility as a consistent economic partner. This alignment of timing and policy has created a strategic opportunity that European manufacturers are exploiting with remarkable discipline. European automakers, energy firms, and technology suppliers are not merely increasing exports. They are embedding themselves into Canada's long-term industrial vision. Investments in electric vehicle production, battery technology, renewable infrastructure, and advanced materials are accelerating, supported by multi-year contracts that prioritize stability over short-term geopolitical maneuvering. This approach directly contrasts with the unpredictability associated with United States policy shifts triggered by trade war dynamics. Europe's strategy is fundamentally about establishing permanence. When a European company commits to a Canadian production facility or research partnership, it signals long-term alignment on standards, governance, and technological pathways. These commitments are designed to integrate Canada into the European Union's economic architecture, effectively broadening Europe's industrial sphere of influence across the Atlantic. For Canada, this shift presents strategic benefits. Aligning more closely with Europe allows Canada to reduce exposure to United States tariffs and policy swings, while gaining access to advanced technologies and well-funded industrial ecosystems. It also enhances Canada's ability to shape international standards in industries such as clean energy and electric mobility, areas where European leadership is strong and where the United States has fallen behind. From a global perspective, the triangulation among Canada, Europe, and the United States is producing a new economic map, one where traditional alliances no longer guarantee priority access or strategic influence. Europe's expanded presence in Canada represents not only a commercial gain, but a geopolitical recalibration that challenges the long-standing assumption that North America will always remain under United States economic leadership. This shift raises a question that few policymakers are prepared to confront. What happens if Canada evolves into a transatlantic industrial partner whose primary alignment is not continental but European? The possibility is no longer theoretical. The groundwork is already visible in supply chain redesigns, investment flows, regulatory coordination, and cross-border research initiatives. And the implications of that possibility are profound. Because if Canada completes this pivot, the continent will not simply experience a redistribution of market share, it will experience the emergence of a new power structure capable of reshaping North American manufacturing in ways the United States may not be able to reverse. Canadian policymakers increasingly understand that the era of automatic alignment with the United States is ending. The volatility generated by the trade war and the constant recalibration of tariffs has exposed a structural vulnerability that Canada can no longer ignore: reliance on a partner whose industrial policy changes abruptly with every political cycle. As a result, Canada is building a long-term strategy centered on diversification, resilience, and autonomy. One pillar of this strategy is the creation of a continental supply chain that does not revolve around the United States. Canada is investing heavily in refining capacity for critical minerals, expanding advanced battery manufacturing, and establishing industrial corridors that link Atlantic ports directly to European Union production centers. These investments are designed to reduce exposure to the policy swings in Washington and to secure technological pathways that align with global emissions reductions and European innovation. Another pillar is regulatory synchronization. Canada's environmental and industrial standards are gradually moving toward European frameworks, allowing for seamless collaboration in zero-emission transportation, renewable energy, and digital infrastructure. This shift gives Canadian firms access to the European Union's massive internal market while attracting foreign direct investment from companies seeking stability and predictability. Canada's long-term plan is not confrontational. It is protective. It reflects the realization that in a world shaped by geopolitical uncertainty, the safest strategy is to expand the number of partners rather than deepen reliance on a single dominant neighbor. By building multiple industrial bridges rather than depending exclusively on a North American highway, Canada is insulating itself from the economic turbulence created by the trade war and the unpredictable tariffs that accompany it. But this strategic repositioning, while logical for Canada, triggers a very different set of consequences for the United States. For the United States, the long-term risks do not end with lower export volumes or shrinking vehicle market share. The deeper danger is the gradual dismantling of the North American industrial hierarchy, an architecture that has supported American manufacturing leadership since the middle of the 20th century. If Canada successfully reorients its economic alliances toward Europe, the United States faces a structural displacement that could redefine its global competitiveness. A weakened bilateral relationship means that the United States loses its closest platform for collaborative research, integrated production, and cross-border innovation. It also loses the geographic leverage that once made American-made vehicles and technologies the default choice across the continent. Without Canada reinforcing the American industrial ecosystem, the United States risks becoming isolated in a competitive landscape where Europe and Asia are accelerating their industrial modernization. The most concerning scenario is not immediate decline, but long-term irrelevance in strategic sectors such as electric mobility, battery technology, clean manufacturing, and resource refinement. If Canada and the European Union deepen their collaboration, they could establish continental standards that bypass United States influence entirely. In that world, American firms would be forced to adapt to external rules rather than shape them, an inversion of power that has profound geopolitical implications. And this sets the stage for the twist that few analysts have dared to articulate. The economic realignment now unfolding is not simply a Canada-Europe partnership replacing a Canada-United States partnership. It hints at the emergence of a new transatlantic production bloc, one that uses Canada as its gateway into North America while excluding the United States from the rulemaking process. This is not a distant possibility. The structural pieces are already being assembled through supply chain redesigns, technology sharing, and industrial investments that no longer treat the United States as indispensable. If this trajectory continues, the United States may soon confront a geopolitical reality it has not faced in the modern era. A neighbor that was once its strongest economic ally becoming the anchor of an industrial system that no longer requires American participation at all. And the most startling element is that the decisive trigger for this transformation is still ahead, a policy shift so significant that when it arrives, it could permanently lock the continent into a new order that no administration in Washington will be able to undo. The broader message emerging from this shift is unmistakable. The architecture of North American industry is no longer anchored to a single center. The trade war and the escalating tariffs did not merely distort pricing. They triggered a long sequence of adjustments that encouraged Canada to reassess its strategic future, realign its partnerships, and reduce its exposure to political turbulence inside the United States. What once looked like a temporary commercial disagreement has become a pivot point with continental consequences. Europe's rising presence in Canada signals a new phase in global competition, one in which alliances are shaped not by tradition, but by predictability, stability, and shared long-term interests. For the United States, the challenge ahead is not only economic, it is a test of whether the country can adapt fast enough to prevent the industrial center of gravity from migrating beyond its reach. And that leads to the defining question. Is this the moment when North America begins to operate under a new balance of power, or can the United States still reclaim its role before irreversible decisions lock in a different future? If you want more fact-based analysis on global markets, shifting alliances, and the forces reshaping the modern economy, subscribe for more in-depth reporting and strategic insight.